politically, turning that into an albatross didn't work. President Trump
Yeah.
won. Here we are sitting here. Heritage is flourishing. The 109 other groups that were part of it are flourishing. Why? Because President Trump and Vice President Vance have the courage. They've got the spine to actually implement this idea that you can dismantle the administrative state, not just for merely saving money, but to give the American people their rights back. And it's a glorious time to be in the United States.
Well, yeah, you look excited. You look excited. I suppose that the question that I think represents the fair concern of people on the center and the center left about that kind of worldview is like, I'm all for dismantling the administrative state. I think the bureaucracies in Western countries have become so bloated, so unaccountable, that that's a necessary thing. I think that the fear that people have is that it's not a project about dismantling the administrative state, but rather wielding it for your own purposes. That's the concern that people have. Is there any truth to this, that you would quite like to use the power of the state to, implement the things that you care about?
Not really. I'll be clear. We pride ourselves at Heritage in not evading questions. So the not really is not an evasion. The two things. The first is the real impetus for Project 2025, really for the work that we've done since 1980 in advising presidents on policies and personnel, is to dismantle for the sake of power. But the second thing is, if I were to steel man the argument of thoughtful people on the center left, maybe I could understand the concern that it also would lead to a particular conservative administration wielding the power of the state. But if we were to agree to that at Heritage, it would be with this proviso that happened within the moral and legal limits of the president's authority. What's unusual is that we finally have a president who's willing to do that. We finally have a group of conservative governors like Ron DeSantis who are willing to do that. And for our friends on the center left, they haven't seen that. And so what's fair about that concern isn't really the substance itself as much as the contrast that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are in actually using power that they properly have.
And why are you so against big government? Because this is something that gets spoken about again and again, particularly in right-wing circles. What is it about big government that you think needs to be dismantled?
The history shows, certainly in the United
Problem is with big government seems to be big unaccountability. I mean, that's one of my biggest criticisms about big government. And then, the bigger the government, for some reason, the more they kind of control what you do. Control, or the more they monitor you, or the more they track your ass. So yes, cutting down our government is a good thing, especially with how much they can spend.
United States, I think across the world, that the larger government becomes, the more power that it accrues to itself and centralizes, the less freedom and self-governance people have. I think it's really important to make a distinction, and I often make this distinction here in the United States, that Heritage is a conservative, not a libertarian entity, which is to say, to be just a little sarcastic about our libertarian friends, we're not anti-government. We want government to exist. We understand that it serves a role. In other words, government needs to be right-sized from our vantage point. The United States federal government, when President Trump took office, had nearly 2.5 million federal employees. It's the largest it's ever been. It's the most expensive it's ever been. You also have the benefit, by the way, of saving money when you reduce the size of government. But the real reason to do so is because government is doing the job that individuals and mediating institutions of civil society ought to be doing. But the other thing is, legally, constitutionally within our system, this unofficial fourth branch of government, the administrative state through the executive branch, is actually doing the function that Congress has, which is to make laws. So our biggest problem with centralized government, in addition to taking some of the power away from the people, is that it quite literally is doing rulemaking. It is doing lawmaking. That's properly the role of the United States Congress. Both Republicans and Democrats, to be fair, are responsible for giving away this power from Congress to the executive branch. What President Trump is doing, what we've been working on at Heritage, is to actually offer a corrective to what has been a 60, 70-year project of doing the work of the people.
And Kevin, how do you ensure that you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater? Because it's very easy to be evangelical about this and go, small government, slash this. But we all know that actually there are government departments that do a lot of good and are in fact highly necessary. The private sector simply can't do it.
There are a few. So let's keep in mind that there's a hell of a lot more bathwater than there is baby. And we've only gotten started with getting rid of all of the excesses. Federal government could probably be half its size, probably smaller. But to be fair to your very fair question, sometimes what people on the center or center left will say, well, what about the scientists? What about the people who are really academically credentialed and they're doing important research? It speaks to the fair point about this regarding competence. Well, we want competent people in government. So while there might be a difference of opinion about how many departments need to exist, those that the American people agree ought to continue to exist ought to have very competent people. They ought to have experts. It's just that there needs to be a lot fewer of them. And so what we see the current administration doing is actually eliminating a lot of positions. They might be filled with very good people, but those particular positions in a variety of departments, we talk about the education department, for example, simply should not be done by a bureaucrat in Washington. So let me just posit that every one of those people who's done those jobs is a good person. I'm actually very happy to posit that. We wish them no ill. It's not appropriate for the federal government to assess the American people a tax, take that money, bring it to Washington, and then send it back to the states and local governments, and then tell us that somehow they're going to improve education. So much so that after spending...
Nah, that is crazy, though. It's like, bro, the Department of Education had nothing to stand on. They had no argument for Loki keeping it there. We had to break up them and the budget so it can be handed out to its respective departments. The problem with the Department of Education is that we've spent $250 billion and only 25% of that gets spent in the classroom. That's a big problem. That's a huge problem. That means there's a lot of people taking salaries that they shouldn't, or putting into, I don't know what, like grants or whatever it is, whatever they was putting that money towards, what they say were administrative costs. It did not help the students in no way, shape, or form.
Trillions of dollars on the education department since its creation in 1979. All we have to show for it is that 25% of the money that the education department collects goes to the classroom. And therefore, at best, all the education department has done is keep American education mediocre. If you take that approach and you go department by department, even in situations where you're not eliminating the entire department, which is what the Trump administration wants to do with education, you're eliminating certain agencies.
And I stay saying this, is that there should be no way, and I mean no way, that there's people able to buy a better education for their kids, and we're putting our kids who are not in private school in the public school that everybody pays into, like billions upon billions of dollars, and you're telling me that my kid can't get an education equal to somebody in private school or a religious school? Like, the only thing people should be paying for is a religious education, not a religious and better education. That is crazy. But I mean, here we are.
I think over 4, 5, 10 years that you're going to right size this government.
I was going to say, look, when it comes to the Department of Education, well, I was a teacher for 12 years, so I know a little bit about it, obviously not in the American system, but you have a very real problem in this country. You have a 79% literacy rate. The UK, by comparison, has a 99%. And when you consider that it's the richest country in the world, there is something desperately wrong going on.
It's a real travesty. I'm a 5th generation teacher. And as I tell people, I only went to public schools, government funded schools. As a conservative, I think it's the most noble promise of the American dream, which is that in spite of all of the pluralism,
bro, not just noble promise. I mean, look, what about an intelligent use of our tax dollars? What about that? $250 billion, only 25 going to kids. Yeah, they weren't a very efficient department. I'll tell you that right now. And they failed every kid in every inner city school. And they got to go for that.
Country, diversity of every kind. We get.
Saying, man, shout out to my man Hellbait. He says, big government. Look at China, Russia, Korea. I know, right? A lot of people want big government and don't even know what they're asking for. Or they failed to see the examples around them.
Guarantee, or at least make the promise, that every American infant, when he or she is born, is going to have access to what should be the finest education in the world. We're not delivering on that promise. And we're not delivering on that promise because we have an outdated system. And I think that's really moving even from the education department specifically, but using it as an instructive example. That's really what the Trump administration is trying to do, which is to say this federal government, which maybe served the people well in the 1970s or 80s, even if you agree with that, it really does have to be updated into the 21st century. And I think that the more time goes on, when the American people see that education is likely to improve as a result of these reforms, that the sky isn't going to fall because you're going to eliminate a certain program in another department, and that these people who've been working for the federal government find jobs in private industry, the more the American people will realize the truth of that statement.
And Kevin, to what extent is everything you're doing infused with the religious dimension? Because the one thing we become aware more and more of as we spend more time here is how vast the chasm is on that issue between Europe and America.
Man, the problem about those government jobs is that it was just too sweet. It was too easy. I mean, like I said, we had people getting paid 6 figures, but like I said, they ain't clocked into work or they ain't plugged in their computer in what, months? Or Elon Musk go send people who are paying like high 5 figures, asking them, hey, yo, what you do? And they're crying about it. I mean, yeah, they need to get fired. They were not earning their, taxpayer paid salary.
Everything here can be traced back to religion, it feels like to us. There's certainly many, many, many things.
Well, everything in life can.
Of course you would say that. So, but in terms of the politics of it, what is the religious element of your agenda here at the Heritage Foundation?
In a strictly political sense, zero. That is to say, in terms of the policy.
Really? I don't know about that. I thought that he say, I ain't gonna lie, there's like a Christian undertone somewhere, but he says 0. All right, let's hear him out on that.
That are being formulated, the legal briefs that we help with, the laws that we help draft. These are secular entities, but the larger points is sort of the little bit of jesting that we just had is that, and as Americans, we understand this well for whatever reason, the context in which we operate is because of our understanding of freedom that God imprinted on each.
And shout out to my man AJ. He says, I went to school in Florida and Massachusetts. Both, he said, both failed parents. I'm telling you, I'm like, our parents over here spending money into this. Like everybody's paying their tax dollars, and you're telling me we're getting these kids are getting a terrible education? What in God's name are y'all doing? What are y'all teaching these kids? Really, where's all this money going to? Because the fact that all these public schools, right, should honestly be dressed up like these private schools. They should have like, nice sports facilities, a clean facility, the state-of-the-art technology and all that great stuff. If we're pouring billions upon billions, 250 billion, this 1 billion could take care of at least, like, I would say, at least like 5 to 10 schools. And we got 250 of it. Like, come on now. That just does not make sense.
Of our souls that we desire to be free. The beautiful thing about the United States with its religious pluralism is that we prioritize no particular religious tradition over another. But I think maybe what is one of the big contrasts between the United States and Europe broadly is that we're very comfortable.
Oh, and shout out AJ and Hellbat. Appreciate the support, guys.
Speaking about faith and religion in public. And perhaps that's why that leads to some people drawing the conclusion that someone working on politics and policy who also is very comfortable talking about faith must therefore have a religious agenda, like a precise religious agenda.
It's an interesting point, but I don't think that's true. I think the reason that it comes across that way is many issues that are settled issues in Europe are highly contested here, such as abortion, such as the criminalization of pornography, which I understand is one of the items on Project 2025, right?
Yep.
That's not really a debate we're having in Europe in anything like the same way. And that's because there's a very strong Christian religious right here, which sees those issues as critical, and because there's a very strong non-religious left that takes those issues in the opposite direction to another extreme, some of us would argue. So I guess what I'm asking is, to what extent are some of the policies, like on abortion, like on pornography, etc., are driven by that as opposed to a kind of, just broader political view?
Respectfully, you're you're making a logical assertion that isn't based on facts.
Oh, sure. Tell me more.
Really?
Very respectfully, on abortion and on criminalizing access to porn for people under 18, both of those claims are being made from natural law. So as long as we can agree that natural law exists, and although some people on the radical left say that that's sort of a religious trope, it's not philosophically.
Sorry, Scott, sorry to interrupt. I don't understand the term natural law.
The understanding that we all have as human beings that certain things are right and certain things are wrong without necessarily having to step into a church for some pastor to tell you.
Yeah, that's true. Like, you don't got to step into a church to know that, well, murder's wrong, stealing is wrong, cheating's wrong. You really don't got to step into a church for that stuff. So yeah, there is such thing as like a natural law.
Just a very basic understanding. And so just to use the example on...
But a lot of people low-key forgot about natural law because, I mean, you know, what the hell is this stance on abortion about?
On the work that we're doing with other organizations to eliminate the access to pornography by state legislatures through their action, that is because of sociological research that shows the harm to young people when they have access to pornography. Can I also make an argument based on Christianity? Sure. But my point is that that work that we're doing, our motivation to do that work, doesn't originate with some Christian agenda we have in politics. And
you think it's bad based on the evidence, as you're
That is correct.
Okay.
And the same thing can be said for abortion, although certainly one of the reasons that abortion is a controversy in the United States is because of the vibrancy of many people of faith who are also willing to be active in politics. I don't deny that point. What I'm trying to clarify is,
dog, I'm not even like the strongest. I'm not even like a Christian or a religious zealot of any type, of any way, shape, or form. But even I can sit here and be like, okay, come on now. Scientifically, even then, yes, it is a life. You are taking out a human life. Let's cut the BS. You can please cut the BS and just tell us that you're okay with doing it. And then we can have that argument about how effed up y'all are in the head. But when you gotta try to sit here and try to call it a parasite, a clump of cells, you're not helping y'all argument. You're only making yourselves like look kind of sick by dehumanizing it. But then you want to complain about the dehumanizing of minorities, but you'll dehumanize your own, well, life or your own offsprings. I mean, crazy work there, liberals. Crazy work there. I mean, you can understand the dehumanization of, you know, minorities, but you can't understand the dehumanization of, you know, your own offspring. I mean, okay.
Is that it doesn't necessarily follow that because the United States has a bunch of Christians, that therefore, when they're working on abortion or they're working on age verification for pornography, that it's exclusively because of their faith. There is great sociological evidence that on both of those cases that shows that we ought to be working on.
Do you have at least $50,000 in your 401k or another retirement account? If so, listen up. The global...
Let's get right back to my man here.
Protected. And this is where I come back to my point earlier about the administrative state, because I think a lot of people on the left suspect that what you'd quite like to happen is for your boys to come into the White House, and rather than kicking everything back to the states, to impose your view of those issues, among others, on the entire country, as, by the way, they have done for some time.
Well, that would be inaccurate. At Heritage, in fact, our big project in the long term, if we're revitalizing self-governance, is to make the federal government a lot less powerful, to really remember and revitalize the tradition of federalism in this country. And so the federal government needs to be doing a lot fewer things than it's been doing, and states need to do that. There are exceptions to that, sure. I mean, it goes back to your earlier question about what's the proper role and scope of the government, how many of these agencies need to exist. But ultimately, a success here in Washington would be not just limiting the size of the federal government, but sending so much of those roles back to state legislatures.
Sure, but I guess I think you know what I'm getting at, or maybe I'm not communicating it clearly. I think I'm just acting as a kind of like translator for the two big tribes in America as best I can, perhaps, or maybe.
And I'm trying not to be obtuse.
Yes, I know you're not. I'm really grateful for that. What I'm really getting at is the left these are generalizations, but the left says abortion is a human right because it's about women's autonomy, among other reasons. Therefore, at the federal level, we must make sure that it's available everywhere. And that got recently overturned, and it got sent back to the states. Their fear is you want to do the opposite of that, which is come in and say human life is a human right. So therefore, at the federal level, we must crack down this. So we're not going to tolerate California having the abortion laws that it has. We're going to tell them how to live their lives. That's the concern. And is that a legitimate concern for people, do you think?
I think philosophically, it's a fair representation. And what I mean by that is two parts to this. The first is what's feasible in politics right now is that states will do what you just described with abortion. And we believe that states should be doing that. It's very clear from the Dobbs decision that states should be doing that. The second part is that we're not going to become a fully pro-life country, which, to be really emphatic about, we do aspire to be in the United States. We aspire to a country where there are no abortions. That's not going to happen because of political action or policy action. We believe that what's the solution to that is so far upstream of politics and policy. It's in our personal decisions, the culture more broadly, perhaps from a revitalization of religion. It's just so separate from the political moment right now that I really mean it when I say that really shouldn't be a concern. I mean, the feasibility of doing that at the federal level right now is literally zero. It can be true that that's the situation, and it can also be true that those of us who would like to end abortion recognize this may be a 100-year project for us to reach hearts and minds, and for Americans to wake up one day and say that just individually, this isn't something that we want to do. We do aspire to that, but it's separate from the political square.
And just correct me if I'm wrong. One of the policies of the Heritage Foundation is that you want abortion capped at 3-month terms. So
I mean, that's not bad. I mean, that's actually pretty good at a 3 months. I mean, that's long enough. That's long enough for these girls to get their ish together.
You don't want it going to 9 months, for example, which I believe is in New York and LA and California.
That's correct. And so if to talk about what we think is feasible in the policy moment at the state level, the so-called 15-week protection or limit is something that I think a lot of states can pass. At Heritage, we would want that to be even more restrictive because, keep in mind, we do believe that life begins at conception. But probably for the next 5 or 10 years, that 15-week limit is what we're going to be dealing with.
Okay, what do you mean by more restrictive, Kevin?
Ideally, we would think that we would make it 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
Like the bill in Florida.
Okay, why 6 weeks?
Because we believe that not only is that a human life, but actually that human being's life is viable outside the 6 weeks. The difference between 6 weeks and 15 weeks is millions of lives, and so we want to protect as many lives as we can. And so we've been very supportive of the bill that was passed in Florida, a few other states which are 6-week bills.
Okay, and there's also a drug that you want banned, and you want contraceptions banned that get transmitted via the post or get sent via the post. Is that correct?
We're very concerned about the abortion pill's negative effects, health effects on women.
Okay,
and so I would like to think that there would be people who are proponents of the right to abortion who also recognize, if you look at the data, that the damaging effects by some women who use that are serious enough that there needs to be further review.
Okay, so you think that there needs to be further review on it?
We're opposed to the bill, but we think at the very least that there ought to be an intellectually honest conversation about the damaging effects on women who use it.
Kevin, why do you think the left in this country is so passionate about protecting what they would call the right to have an abortion?
I think, with all due respect to people with whom I disagree, mean nothing personal to them, that there is this philosophical evolution of hyper-individualism in which you realize that, representing their position best as I can, that your quote-unquote rights have nothing to do with the people you will bring into the world, your own children. And that has become at the same time that we've seen a decline in religiosity in the United States, especially among certain segments of people who are left of center, and I mean all of this respectfully, although I disagree with them, not a coincidence. And so I think that therefore abortion or protecting abortion rights becomes almost a quasi-religion for some people on that side. And perhaps that's fine. I disagree with the position, but that's why when we were talking earlier about what's feasible and not feasible politically or in terms of policy right now, I said that I think that it's important to remember that fixing the abortion problem is going to be something so far upstream of the political square. This is something that will have to be a matter of hearts and minds for people because it is such a deeply held position. It's very different than any other kind of public policy that I'm aware of.
So this isn't something that's going to be imposed from the top down.
That's infeasible right now.
Mm-hmm. What are you excited about? The administrative state. Look, I don't know many people who are center right who are not excited about the dismantling of administrative state. Now, look, I think there is probably, we saw it with the nuclear engineers, and you know, there's going to be some things. It's going to be a bumpy road, and things will have to be corrected when things move this fast. That tends to happen.
What about the nuclear engineers?
Nuclear engineers are something that were people who were in charge of the nuclear codes that got sacked, fired, and then they had to be rehired back. Is this not a real thing?
I don't.
It's possible. There's so much stuff flying around now. I don't know what to believe, really.
Well, I'm not. You're certainly being honest and representing what you've read. I'm just not sure that what you read is accurate.
Okay. I think it's fair to say, from everything we know about rapid change that happens at scale, that it's not always going to be universally exactly the way that you might want it to happen, and mistakes will get made. Is that fair?
It's sort of like the creation of the education department, which actually has created a situation that in some schools in this country, zero students are proficient in math and reading and 14.
I will steal your argument even more for you. I will say that when you're removing a cancerous tumor, you are also potentially able to do damage that you don't intend.
Potentially.
Right? Yeah. And we know that can happen. Right? So administrative state aside, what else are you excited about that is happening or is going to happen over the next three and a half years?
The thing I'm most excited about, I mean, and I'm light years more excited about than even the administrative state. It's the greatest measure of success for this administration, the restoration of the American dream. And I know that maybe that sounds trite, maybe it sounds political. I really don't mean it either way. I mean it just as an American citizen, as a husband and father of 4 kids. I was really concerned in the last year or two when Heritage was doing focus groups of people across the political spectrum, but especially people who were center left. We're trying to figure out not just how to speak with them about issues, you know, for the sake of political wins, much more importantly, because remember, we're a think tank, trying to understand them. So why is it that abortion is so important to you? Why is it that other issues are? The most common thread was a depressing one, and it was that the American dream is dead.
Yep.
And liberal people, is real quick, liberal people, conservative people, people in the center, Black men, Hispanic women, for the most radical leftist person.
Like I said, yeah, some people say it's because, I don't got enough money and all this good stuff. And then other people, it's just, I just don't want kids. I want to live a selfish lifestyle and just be for myself all my life. And you know, it's crazy. It'd be them same people who also want to be with people who want kids. It'd be like wild as hell.
Who hates what Heritage does. I want them to believe the American dream is alive. And the reason is that it means that economic prosperity is possible. It means that education success is possible. Different people define that different ways.
What's your definition of the American dream?
I'll just finish that thought if I may, and then I'll answer that question. What Trump and Vance are doing with this pace of change is showing the American people that it's possible, not just to right-size government, but that we can do that for the purpose of all of us, or a majority of us, waking up one day and saying the American dream's alive. We may still vote differently, but we're at least going to believe that it's alive. That's a good thing. It's healthy for civil society. I believe the American dream, to answer your question, is a belief that anything is possible in the greatest country in the world. And anything is possible because of the opportunities created with government out of the way, but most importantly, because civil society is healthy, because my neighbors who may have different political signs in their yards have no problem with me succeeding as a conservative, nor I for them as liberals, and that every American child can wake up and say, I have access to a great education. What I do with is up to me. I have access to create a business, to be successful professionally, but that I also understand that I owe this country and, of all other countries, the United Kingdom, a great debt, and I want to pay that back.
But and look, what you say is enormously inspirational, and there's a part of me as a British person that feels deeply uncomfortable at, at
That wasn't my intention.
your upbeat tones. But when I hear the words "anything is possible," the cynic in me goes, "Really? What do you mean by that?"
I saw you twitch. When
Yeah, I did. I can't help it. We don't have dreams in the United Kingdom.
Well, we want to help you restore those. I get your question. What I mean by that is that if someone takes initiative, and whether through education or business, there's nothing in the system, there's nothing structurally that will stand in the way of that person's initiative and sustained work ethic allowing them to succeed. And in that situation, really anything is possible. We've had presidents in this country. Think about Andrew Jackson, orphaned.
My bad though. What I was pretty much saying was, well, in most cases, it's the reason why you don't succeed in life is because, well, it's because you're lazy. Let's be quite honest with you. You are lazy. And it's not white supremacy. It's not the government. No, it's just you. And you're just in your, well, laziness.
Taught himself the law. He had no reason to ever expect that he would be president of the United States. Or there are modern examples of young men and women, for whatever reason, you would think they have no reason to be aspirational, but they're going to be very successful. I understand outside the United States, this sounds like poppycock, but it is the heart of the American dream.
I completely agree with you. And one of